The oldest and strongest human emotion is fear, and the oldest and strongest type of fear is trepidation of the unknown. When we were children, our parents told us that monsters didn't exist, but we were sure that something was lurking under the bed or in the closet. Fear sees, even if our eyes are closed. Welcome to the realm of the arcane. My name is Lon Strickler. Join me as I examine unexplained creatures, strange manifestations, and remarkable realities. Imagine this next hour as a voyage of discovery to strange lands, seeking not for new territory, but for new knowledge of the supernatural. Come on board as we begin this adventure together. Hey folks, good evening and welcome to another episode of Arcane Radio. I'm your host, Lon Strickler, and I thank you for joining me here on the Paranormal King Radio Network. Listeners can share their support for Arcane Radio by becoming a patron. Simply go to phantomsandmonsters.com and click the Podbean patron banner. Now, before I introduce my guest, I want to mention an account I recently received. Now, this came from a gentleman in Laredo, Texas, who stated he had a sighting that remained fresh in his mind for almost 20 years. He said when he was 17, he had just joined the band as a lead singer. They were practicing outside when we all automatically stopped playing and gazed in disbelief as a creature floated or slowly glided about 20 foot from the ground and about 20 foot away from us. It can only be described as a baby with small head and red eyes. It had no feathers, just skin under the wings. It turned and looked at us as it was slowly gliding by. Now, aside from me, there were three other witnesses, and one of which passed away just a few years ago. I have looked everywhere for years trying to identify this flying baby, but I've never seen or heard of anything else reporting it. Now, the closest I have found to the phenomena is the Mothman. I think this creature may have been a young Mothman of sorts. Now, Laredo, Texas is an area that I have received a lot of reports over the years. And in fact, these reports include several UFO reports, but I've also received a flying ray-shaped cryptid as well, which I have been keeping track of nationwide for like the past 10 years. Also, I had a very strange report from Laredo concerning what had possibly been a rake. The gentleman said he and his wife were returning from San Antonio on a Sunday night sometime around May or June. He said his wife had fallen asleep, and so I turned up the radio and drove south, taking I-35 into Laredo. As we approached the north side of town, I turned the cruise control off and dropped down from 65 to 60 to negotiate a turn under the railroad bridge that crossed the interstate. I was in the right-hand lane as I came close to the bridge. That's when I spotted what at first looked like a homeless guy, completely naked, scuttling along the embank of the road. He was skinny, pale skin, and his arms looked emaciated. As I passed him, I had a creepy feeling that something about this person was all wrong. The way he moved, as well as the way his arms and legs were animalistic than human. With 26 years of law enforcement under my belt, I thought about stopping and going back to see what this guy was doing, but however, with my wife along, it was close to midnight, so I kept going, figuring the guy was just drunk. I told my wife about it, when, what I had seen when we arrived home, and she thought it sounded like a drunken guy living under the bridge. But after meeting several folks, hearing about similar type of encounters, I began to listen, and it sounded what people described as a rake. The creature was paralleling the road, so I never saw its face or eyes. but the body shape was as close to the drawings I had seen. So every time I approached that railroad bridge, I slowed down and take a second look, but so far I haven't seen it again. Now, there's no doubt that Laredo, Texas, as well as most of South Texas, is a hotbed of unexplained activity, and I have received a lot of sightings in that part of the country. So it is definitely a hot spot for strange things. So let's get started. Tonight's guest, Linda Godfrey, is an Anomalies Investigator, author, and artist. Linda has written 19 books on strange creatures, phenomena, and people. As a journalist, she was the first to break the story of the terrifying werewolf-like monstrosity lurking in the shadows shrouded forest surrounding Elkhorn, Wisconsin's Bray Road. She's a frequent guest on national television and radio shows, including Monsterquest, Lost Tapes, Monsters and Mysteries, Coast to Coast AM, and many, many more. Linda will appear in the upcoming film, The Bray Road Beast, which is due to be released in October. Her website can be found at lindagodfrey.com. Linda, thanks for joining me.
Well, thanks so much for having me, Len. I'm really glad to be here.
You know, I recently had the opportunity to watch Seth Breedlove's film, The Bray Road Beast. And I was somewhat surprised at the history and lore associated with the area. Mm-hmm. Now, because the occult activity is said to be prevalent in the general area, do you think it's possible that the Bray Road Beast may be a summoned being or possibly a skinwalker?
Well, I think you can't throw that possibility out, given the fact that there were some weird things going on. You know, I had always mentioned in my book that there were some bags of mutilated dog remains found in a couple of places around the county. Some of the places where that occult activity was going on were really quite a distance from Bray Road. There was said to be at one particular house over near Whitewater Lake, which would be a good at least 20-minute drive. So there weren't really a lot of things on Bray Road. There was a woman's body found on Bray Road some years later after that, but it wasn't considered to be a local thing. She was brought evidently from somewhere, and being kind of a lonely road, not super lonely, lots of times it can be quite busy, but late at night it usually is. It's an easy place to dump something you don't want people to find again, you know. And there was a story going around that somebody had seen a person all dressed in black, riding on a black horse with black hounds, you know, coming away from that road. So there were a number of things. One thing that has come to light just in the past few years, I mentioned it in one of my books, and it's in that new film as well, was the fact that when one of the key witnesses first went to visit with the animal control officer, the one that gave me the werewolf folder, it was a file folder marked werewolf that was keeping all of the sightings in, that book started flying off the bookshelf behind him, you know, and they both agreed to that. And trust me, that officer is not somebody who speaks hastily or lightly or false. I mean, he's a very, very nice, very serious sort of person, you know. And if he says books were flying off the shelf, I believe it. And Lori too, the witness, they were kind of flabbergasted at that. So there have been these incidents, and I did discover just in the last year or so that because I've been trying all these years, Lon, to figure out why Bray Road, why this little 3 to 4 mile long country road where there's really nothing obvious. But I did discover that it was a well-used Native American trail, and that it was a source of maple trees. There were big maple groves there where they would come and get maple sugar, which was a sacred thing because maple sugar is not only edible in itself, it preserves food. It's something that maintains life. So this whole grove would have been very sacred to them. And then I also discovered that the ending point of Bray Road, where it runs into Highway 11, and also Bowers Road crosses there, and another one. When I looked in the old history books, I discovered that they were all pathways to other lake systems, and they actually constituted a natural geographic medicine wheel. A medicine wheel is something that looks like a wheel from a wagon with all the spokes, and they can be handmade. They're very widely used in ceremonies for many tribes. And as I researched the medicine wheels more and more, I found several sources that said the center of a natural medicine wheel, not one built with rocks by people, but that is formed out of the landscape, like this one, is thought of as a portal or a vortex into another place. And so this is the closest I've come to finding any kind of a background or history for the possible occult backgrounds. And also, you mentioned from that movie, you heard the testimony of Lee Hampel, is the farm owner, that I've been assisting him in his field, putting out dead deer, roadkill deer from Illinois that he would bring down in his truck, and we'd put them out and kind of observe what happened. He had trail cameras. We'd go and take notes. And one of the things that occurred was that, and I have this documented in my book, Monsters Among Us, we saw orange-shaped forms in the tree lines in the daytime, not at night, in the daytime, that showed up on the trail cams, and they would be there for a certain amount of time, and then they would just be gone. We would rule out sunshine flashing on it, or sunset colors or anything like this. These were in morning, in daylight, and then at the end there'd be something kind of furry and black against the camera lens, or way out in the field, as if it had come out of these things. And they looked somewhat Bigfoot shaped to me. He also had lots of different footprints too. So he had some that he calls fist prints, which looked kind of like if you took a giant horseshoe and stomped it way down into the ground. And then he had 5-toed canine prints that were very deep also. And we're just talking about the hind feet being used, so they were bipedal. So tons of mysteries, and that farm is located right near that same point where it would be the center of the geological wagon wheel or prayer wheel.
Yeah, I'm familiar with medicine wheels. I mean, we use medicine wheels in crystals, and in certain type of essential oils and such. So I know the lore. I know that the native people use those. Now, the area we're talking about that's Lafayette Township in Walworth County, Wisconsin, which is near, I guess it's just east of Elkhorn.
Right.
Have the local authorities ever said much about the phenomena?
Not really, and when they have, it's either jokey, but they were giving out silver bullets for a while. They gave one to me. I'm not sure it went. And in one of the TV shows, our county sheriff put on a big white boss hog style hat, and dressed up in a way that I've never seen him dressed before. That was kind of odd. But way back when, the local wildlife officials were saying things like, well, they didn't really see a 5 to 7 foot tall wolf-like creature walking on its hind legs. What they saw was a 36-pound coyote very weirdly making a jump like 5 to 6 feet in the air, and then suddenly it appeared in the headlights, and they thought that just for the microsecond that it was up at the top of that leap, and then they thought that they were seeing. That's such a stretch to me. It just falls apart. You can't even discuss it because it falls apart while you're trying to explain their view. Anything to keep people away from clogging up Bray Road, which in a way you can't blame them for not wanting to have to send out extra deputies, use up their force, take extra money for that sort of time spent patrolling crowds. I think that there was a lot going on in that vein, in that the officials were trying to sort of poo-poo it. But generally, poo-pooing it is about the way that it seemed in most cases.
What do the Wisconsin native people believe these upright canines are?
Well, I started asking people when I had the chance. I have a number of First Nation friends, and I've met others along the way and asked for particular interviews with one of the elders at the Ho-Chunk Nation, who's also an anthropologist. And what she said and what most of the ones I have interviewed have said is that they believe that the upright canines and Bigfoot are both originally spirit animals or spirit creatures. They're not just animals. They're spirit creatures with intelligence that come from another realm, or the spirit world as they would call it. And most often they believe that the entrance to and exits to and from this world are located in freshwater springs. And that's why you'll so often find sacred burial mounds and the animal effigy mounds located very close to freshwater sources.
Mm. Now, there was, back in the 30s, there was a actual report of one of these upright canines on top of a burial mound. Can you kind of go into that a bit?
Yeah, that was a really interesting incident. It was not on Bray Road. It was in Jefferson County, the next county, about the middle of the county, near its main town, which is Jefferson. And this was St. Coletta's, and it was an institute for the care of the developmentally disabled. And back in, it was 1936, and there was a night watchman who was a former champion boxer, so he's kind of a big guy, who was supposed to make the rounds on foot. I've seen on the internet some places people say he was driving by, and that's not true at all. He was making his usual rounds on foot, and there was an Indian mound close to what is now the highway in front of the building. At that time, it was sort of in the background of the buildings. But he looked at it. It seemed that there was somebody standing on top of that burial mound. So he went and looked closer. And to his surprise, it wasn't a person at all. It was a 6 to 7 foot tall humanoid. And that's probably a closer way to say it. Mm-hmm. The way he described it, it was almost like half Dogman, half Bigfoot. It had some attributes of both. And you can see in my book, I was loaned a copy of the sketch made by his son, Joseph Shackelman, who was a Racine County newspaper editor at the time. And when his father his father never told anyone about it except his wife, who told him never to tell anyone else. But he confessed it to his son when he thought he was on his deathbed and had Joe draw this sketch for him, at his direction. And the interesting thing is that when the thing saw him the first night, it ran away. But he went back again the next night, armed with a really large flashlight and a kind of a billy club sort of light. And the creature was there again. This time it stood up and faced him and looked at him, and it made a noise that he interpreted as sounding like the word Gadara, which is the region in the Bible where Jesus was casting out spirits. And I always have to play devil's advocate, having 10 years as a reporter, it's sort of drilled into me. It does occur to me that the grr and the duh, those sounds are part of a growl. It may have been growling in an unusual way, but I thought it was interesting that he also thought that it sounded like that Gadaras, and he called it like a proto-human language, was what he addressed that as. And he did seem to scare it away, and as far as I know, there were not any more incidents with that creature there. But Joe Shackelman's father, Mark, who was the one that saw it, said he looked into its eyes and he felt that it was, quote unquote, a demon straight from hell.
Wow. Well, with all the information that you've had over the years, do you, could this simply be a case of lycanthropy?
Well, if it is, it's somebody who's been having the experience for a long time, because the sightings are still happening. And
right.
The sightings that were first reported, like this one went back to 1936. I had a number of them that were in the early to mid 80s. So we're talking about, 30, 40 years.
Right.
Now, I don't know really much about the practice of lycanthropy. I don't know if people who claim to do that are supposed to have long lives, or if they do it for many decades. But I think that the length of time that it's been going on sort of argues against that. And it also argues against it being, say, one natural animal. I mean, the average lifespan for a wild wolf is something like 9 years at most.
Mm-hmm.
And often it ends much quicker. So you have to, that leaves us with two alternatives. Either there is a largely unknown, unseen breeding population, although we do have reports of pups now and then, seeing them with pups, a breeding population, or they are replenishing their community with individuals from elsewhere, whether they're elsewhere on this planet or out west, and they take that normal natural wildlife corridor down from the Black Hills through Minnesota, through southern Wisconsin, and down around the Great Lakes, and just happen to end up and stay there is another thing. Or are they coming from a realm where they cannot reproduce naturally in their own world or whatever? This is what some people have suggested to me. And so they use portals that they know of to come here. And while they're here, and this is something else that my native friends have all said, while they're here, they're not some kind of ooky spooky, spirits. They have to be fully corporeal, so they can eat, produce energy, do all the things that a normal animal would do. But there are times when their ties to the earth are lighter and they start going back into their other vibration, their other world. Mm-hmm. And maybe they come back, maybe they don't. It's something, and all this is, of course, speculative. I'm not saying any of this is gospel stuff. These are just different theories. But it does come down to they're either having a breeding population here or coming in here from somewhere else.
Now, you and I have talked about this for years now. And, when I first started discussing this with you, and I don't know when that was, but it was a while ago.
Eons.
You were more on the natural side, but you've kind of changed a bit over the years.
Well, as it goes, and the longer you're in this and the more things happen to you, you just kind of can't help it. And I've had right out on that farm, this wasn't talked about in the film, but I've had an experience where Lee Hampel, the owner, and Sanjay Singhal, a colleague of mine who often goes off hiking and researching. We saw something we will never be able to explain. We were watching one night. We had a 180-pound deer out there that nothing was touching, which was weird. It was about this same time of year, about the same kind of weather, and nothing was going near it. There should have at least have been turkey buzzards, taking things off of it, or coyotes taking it. I mean, coyotes will eat almost anything. They should have been taking a bite here and there, and nothing was touching it. And I said, well, maybe there's something bigger that's scaring away all these little guys, really bigger, and we should try and just do a stakeout. And they agreed. So we were sitting in Sanjay's car near some shrubs all the way across the field, which is like a 40-acre field. So it was quite a large expanse, and there was a tree line where the deer bait was always put, and we kind of aimed the car at that spot, and then we sat there waiting, and we were watching natural airport traffic that was going over one part of the tree line. I was anyway, and I happened to notice one of these lights that looked like the landing gear light of an airplane suddenly stopped right where it was in midair, and then went noticeably backwards. It wasn't just like, twinkling or oscillating. It traveled backwards. And I said, I was in the back seat, the two guys were in the front, and they're both big guys. They're both like 6'2" or so. I could barely see between the two of them. I said, look, guys, I don't think that one's a plane. And they looked at it, and right as I said that, and they looked at it, it began heading for us straight across the field, which was really a weird thing. And we were just sort of mesmerized at first, and then we began to all just kind of look for our cameras, and we were saying, what is that? Oh my gosh, it's coming closer, that kind of thing. It didn't take very long either. Mm-hmm. And it stopped about 30 feet away from the car, maybe 30 feet in the air, max. It may have been closer than that. It was about the size of a basketball, we all agreed. It was a perfectly spheroid object that was lit in, the light was sort of a cool white color, but it wasn't really lighting up the land around it. It was self-contained, self-lit, and it was hovering there. And I was going for I was just positioning my camera to start, taking a video, and Sanjay had the idea to shine the mag light at it, and he just did that. He aimed it out his window and shined it at it, and we all had the extreme sense that it was surprised, and it sort of just sort of jiggered in place a little bit. It's hard to even describe what it did, and somehow poofed out, but not like making a poof. It just sort of, we all have real difficulty trying to express how it went out, but it did. It went out, and then we all shared our favorite special word of surprise at the time, because and Lee, who is a retired math and physics teacher, is going, "That's not possible. That's not physics. It can't happen in physics. It couldn't have done that." But yet it had, and the three of us, pretty highly trained observers, Lee especially by then, all saw the same thing, and in perfect light, perfect viewing conditions. And how do you explain that?
Yeah.
And this is right near the edge, that end of Bray Road. His road intersects with Bray Road right there, and it's the territory. So sooner or later, enough of these things occur, and you just have to start taking, unless you're a hidebound skeptic, which I try to be open, yet keep my reporter's hat on. But once things are happening like that to you, it's different than just having an intellectual appreciation of them. And you have the gut knowledge that, yeah, it happens. There's no possible way to explain that by known means.
Well, this is something that's been becoming more and more prevalent in cryptid research, with these orbs or UFO activity coinciding with sightings or around areas where sightings have been at. So, honestly, that doesn't surprise me, what you just mentioned. And it seems that Lee has also been filming a lot of lights on his property as well.
Oh, yes. Yeah. He's got thousands of trail shots that you can't even imagine me. And he sends me them like maybe once a week. He had one last week where there's no indication of why anything was tripped on the camera, and you can see these light rays, these very defined light rays are coming down from above. Then this is daytime. Then there's a middle shot where all of a sudden, at about the halfway point, these straight shafts, if these were just shafts of sunlight, they would have been straight. They turn into squiggly lines about halfway down. They remained straight on top, and then halfway down turned into these squiggly lines, and then a second or so later, it's back to the straight ones. What kind of light beam, straight light beam, turns half of itself into a squiggly line?
Yeah, that's hard to believe, really.
And yet there they are. I mean,
Yeah.
They're just incredible. I'm sure I could get him to post those or give them to you so you could post them if you want. But
Yeah.
he has things like that and weirder, even weirder than that. So it's like a huge electromagnetic disturbance all over that area is how I would characterize it. He's been followed in his pickup truck by a giant ball of what somebody identified as hot plasma, except there's no source for the plasma. At the time, it followed him on a road, and then when he turned the corner, it just vanished. That kind of thing. We have in Monsters Among Us, I have a good layout of what one of the recent, over the past few years, sightings, which was a farmer who lived maybe about a half a mile down the road from Lee. He was like his next neighbor down. And this was February, a couple of years ago, when it was 10 below zero. And he's sitting in his shed, And all of a sudden, his animals just start going crazy, making noise. And he looks out the window because farmers are always up at this was like 3 a.m. And farmers are very often up at that time of the night because their equipment breaks down. They have to fix it. They have no choice. So he looks out and he sees this coyote just going lickety-split as hard as it can run for the woods. And he's like, what's chasing that? And he looks and sees, he said it was 5 to 6 foot tall, shaggy brown furred creature, a canine, looked like a wolf, leaning forward a little bit, but running on its hind legs, and slowly but surely overtaking this coyote, running in the snow.
Mm.
The interesting thing is that this happened at 3 o'clock, and about 1 minute prior to that, a sequence of shots of coyotes eating just gnawing the bones of a deer carcass over at Lee's ended. And in the last few shots, there were light rays coming that looked very much like these ones he just sent me the other day, coming from out of nowhere in the woods, shining right down, beaming onto the coyote. And the last one that there was, the coyote's looking up at it as if, it's seeing the light too. It's not something that the camera's doing. And then it leaves after 6 straight hours of gnawing those bones. And then a minute after that, it is seen by the neighbor being chased by something.
Wow. You had mentioned earlier that it seemed like the roadkill in which other animals will stay away from. That's something else that has been reported to me, where someone would mention that they'd see one of these upright canines either feeding on roadkill or they'd be around the area of a dead animal and nothing else would go near it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've heard that before too. Yeah.
That's so strange.
Yeah, it is. It is, because normally the way that nature works is something is dead or killed or, down in the woods, and there's a whole group of predators that come. The biggest guys usually get their favorite part first. Usually around there, the coyotes will go in and they'll kind of core out from the back, and then the skunks, the kind of nasty slashing smaller things, because skunks and raccoons and badgers and creatures like that, and all of them have been seen, can be kind of nasty if they're fighting over something. They'll come in, the turkey buzzards will fly in, and they'll be taking long stringy bits out, and then the smaller ones finally it gets down to the flies and the maggots. So generally there's this whole little ecosystem built around this dead animal. And in this case, it was like it was made out of, vinyl propylene or something. Nothing wanted it.
Yeah. Well, I heard a story when we started getting these sightings in Pennsylvania that kind of reinforces that a bit. There was a DNR ranger who had pulled into a gas station with the witness I talked to. And he said there was a small elk in the back of the truck, and he asked the DNR ranger about this elk, and he said he was wondering how long it was dead. He said, the ranger told him, this elk look like it's been dead for several days, but nothing fed on it. And he said this elk had a collar placed on it about a year ago, and we had been tracking it, and something slicked the collar off of this thing because they found the collar nearby, but no other animal had fed on this elk.
Wow.
So, that's very strange. I've also heard the same thing about dead black bear that would be basically eviscerated but not fed upon. Mm-hmm. That would be sitting around. It would sit for days.
Yeah.
So there's something to it.
Yeah, we've seen that happen any number of times. And when you said slit the collar, that reminded me of one of the deer that he had gotten. He had this because they were always being carried away to different parts, and obviously picked up or over the shoulder of these things because we'd only see the hind footprints.
Right.
And he had this idea of getting a couple of cheap iPhones off of eBay and then setting one up to, geolocate the other one so that if something came and picked up, the deer and that iPhone was in there, then we could track it, which
That's
is
a smart
brilliant.
idea.
Isn't that brilliant? Yeah. I mean, he just has these great ideas. So I went over to his farm and dressed in my worst stuff, because what we were doing was trying to figure out where on this deer carcass we could insert the iPhone, where we could get it in there and it would remain hidden. And we thought we were going to put it in through its mouth and have it just kind of shoved up, back in its mouth. But it wouldn't go over the teeth. There was no way we could get it over the teeth. It's surprising. Mm-hmm. And we tried all kinds of other ideas I wouldn't even want to go into. And he finally gave up. And what he did was he had some super, super strong some kind of vinyl material that is used for a lot of technical things. That's very, very difficult to break or cut. And so he attached that to the iPhone and then attached that to the deer. Well, the next day or so, he went out there, and the collar, which was supposed to be super unbreakable, it looked like it had been cut, but there were no implements or anything like that around. The deer hadn't been touched, and the iPhone was still there. So whoever did it wasn't trying to get the iPhone. Mm-hmm. And it's just inexplicable how that would happen. And if an animal was there and wanted to feed on it, why would they bother just to, go to all the trouble of chewing off and it didn't look chewed. It looked like it was surgically cut. Mm.
Yeah, that's very similar to what this person described to me and what other people have been describing to me. You hear these stories about mutilations and so forth, where the animals are surgically sliced, but nothing feeds upon them. Well, right. Maybe there's something else going on there, but it's absolutely bizarre. It really is.
Oh yeah. I had another picture that I took and put in my book. There was one of them had finally been just gone to town on by the coyotes and stuff, and had been kind of pulled apart, and the head and the spine were still attached, but they were out in the middle of the field. Something had taken them all the way out there. And cougars, if they're going to drag something away, they'll drag it to where they can cover it with brush or take it up in a tree. But whatever this was, thought they would just leave it out in the center of this field. It seemed almost like a sign, like it was wanting to be noticed. And the head had been attached to the spine, but it was separated by it was twisted, and it would have to take some really strong twist and then cut with something. And Lee took that to a butcher and said, what would have to happen for this to have been separated, for the neck bone to have been separated from the spine bone in the way that you see here? And the butcher looked at it and said, well, it would have needed to have had a big chopping block and a big butcher knife. Mm. Which means, and trust me, there's nobody running around Lee's field with a chopping block and a giant butcher knife.
Yeah, I'm quite sure.
Bigger trouble. We're much bigger trouble than anybody knows. So, these unexplainable things happen, and you're just lost for words.
We were talking about the interdimensional possibilities, and these, and in fact, when you look at the film where Lee has these videos of this mist forming above these deer carcasses. Right. It's so bizarre. I have thought for years that the interdimensional theory has some validity to it, though it's hard to explain. It's almost impossible to explain. But I really started looking at it much differently when we started having these sightings in Chicago of these winged humanoids that people were describing. I mean, sometimes we had one case in particular where this was seen and it just literally disappeared, like it went through a doorway, or these things would just show up for a matter of seconds and just suddenly disappear. I mean, there's got to be something to this. I mean, we are just on the cusp of this, quite frankly. And, I think it goes for a lot of different cryptid activity, and not only uprights or these winged humanoids, but also for Bigfoot. We've been hearing for years about people tracking Bigfoot, and these things just suddenly disappear.
Right.
It's very bizarre, but there's got to be something to it.
Well, you probably are familiar with the incident that I call the man bat in La Crosse,
right,
Wisconsin, which is over on the Mississippi River on the western side of Wisconsin, which is, for those who don't know the state very well, it's a very different terrain than we have anywhere else in Wisconsin, because being by the Mississippi and the unglaciated area, there are cliffs and caves and rocks, and looks more like parts of Wyoming or something. And this incident was back in 2006, and they called me right away, and I was out there. I drove out and spent a few days there out in the field with them. And what happened was a man in his 50s and his 25-year-old son were driving along a country road from La Crosse to a smaller community called Holman. It's kind of a satellite town. And they were just looking at the road, driving along. And this thing they noticed was heading straight for their truck. They were driving a pickup truck, and it was coming right for their windshield. And they kind of braced, and the son slowed down because he was sure that it was going to just smash right into them. And just before it did so, it just suddenly shot straight up in the air, making this piercing scream that made both of them sick. And they described it. He drew a sketch for me, and it looks like sort of a wolfish, black-furred or dark-furred creature with giant bat wings, kind of like a gigantic fruit bat is what it reminded me of very much. And the vibration or whatever it was from that screech it made both of them instantly ill. The son had to pull over and throw up, and the father was in bed for 2 weeks from the incident, from whatever happened to it. But we went to other places. They showed me some nearby places that we drove around in, and we had extremely odd things happening. We were on this almost completely desolate country road where there were no houses, no anything, and a horse came galloping across the dark field. This was nighttime, pitch black. A horse came galloping across the dark field. It just jumped right in front of the car that we were in and stood there. It had a braided tail. It didn't have any saddle or anything like that on. It stood there until the man who saw this was a Native American, and his girlfriend was along, and she's a hunter, and she got out of the car and went over near the horse, and then she got back in the car immediately, white as a sheet, and said, "We have to leave. We have to go right now," and wouldn't say why. And when she did that, the horse began trotting. It trotted ahead of us all the way till we came to a safe turn out of that area, and then it galloped off another field. So there were weird things, going on. We drove past the site of that. The happening was where you would be cresting a hill in your car, and everybody, my friend Terry, who was driving, and the man and his girlfriend all saw something ruffle across the road. They said it was like somebody unfurled a big bolt of black silk fabric, was the best way they described it. And then there were other reports out there too on a part of the city of La Crosse called French Island, which is near a nuclear power plant, where there were also sightings, and one of them it talked about it sort of unfurling itself in the same way, as if you had a bolt of cloth and you threw it out, into the air, and you could just picture it making those ripples. I don't know if you've seen any of those in the Chicago ones, but
we have. We've had people tell us about they had seen this being with its wings wrapped around it like a cape. Yeah, and we had most of the sightings were in the Chicago area back in 2017, but lately, most of the sightings in 2018 have been in Wisconsin. And I mean, anywhere from Elkhorn east over into across Kettle Moran, over into Kenosha, up into Milwaukee. We had one in Milwaukee, a very distinctive sighting in Milwaukee. I don't know exactly how many we've had, but I think it's safe to say there have been 6 or 7 reports this year in southeast Wisconsin.
Well, all the areas that you've just mentioned are places that are very rich in ancient animal-shaped effigy mounds,
mm-hmm.
which are very unusual. Not many people realize that southern Wisconsin, has something like 96% of the world's ancient animal-shaped effigy mounds. That means they weren't always used for burial. Some were just, sort of pictorial. Some of them are really huge. They go up to 160 feet wide or more.
Mm-hmm.
And they're all around Madison and the lakes. They're around Milwaukee, and especially the river and the lakes. The Kettle Moraine is full of them. All these places that you mentioned, because it's such a lake-rich area. I really believe that whole area was sacred because of the lakes that are there and the great number of fresh springs that there were too. Would have all made this entire area sacred. And some people suggest that medicine men of the time were able to set up guardians or to establish secure portals that would stay, different things. And I have no way of knowing if that's true, or you can't even really investigate something like that nowadays after all this time. But it's just another way of looking at it.
One of my team members asked me to ask you if you know of any reports coming out of the Richard Bong recreation area as of late.
Well, not super of late, but it is a very rich source of sightings. And I have a friend who is now a retired, he retired early, a retired county sheriff's deputy over in that area. And he saw an upright wolf man running across that area while he was parked quietly at night one night filling out his reports. It was a place he liked to go. I think he saw 2 of them there on different occasions. I've also had somebody report seeing a black panther running across the road in that area. And there are underground tunnels that are closed up now, but they were just left open for years. I know kids from the area in the 70s and 80s used to go and party down there. I guess it was full of, I know people who did that. I did not, but I know people who did. And now they're closed up. But it's interesting because that was supposed to be a special a special military air observation place and station. And they shut it down like the day, just about the exact same time that the runways were being. I think it was maybe the day before the runways were poured. All the other things, the tunnels and the buildings and everything was all in place to let it go. And then suddenly, they just said no, forget it. And the local rumor is that's because of what was in the tunnels.
This person I asked that question told me that same story.
Oh, really?
He's in aviation. He's into aviation, and he told me that same story. So, yeah, you're right. That is pretty bizarre. Maybe they did find something. My God.
Yeah. And there are so many tunnels everywhere. Tunnels, old mine shafts, old steam tunnels from when all the buildings had to be heated by steam and were connected by these tunnels.
Right.
Every downtown, just about in Wisconsin and many other states, I'm sure, has downtown tunnels connecting everything, because in the days before they had the efficient snow plowing we have now, you'd get, a 3-4 foot dump of snow and nobody could get anywhere. So you could get all over downtown Oshkosh, for example, just without coming up for air, just, from the lower level tunnels. So there is this subterranean sort of refuge that we don't see, but other things could easily utilize if they wanted. I mentioned somewhere I've had rumors of werewolves in the sewers of Minot, North Dakota, and again it was a policeman writing me about them. I've never been able to prove that. I've never had anybody see they saw one, but it's another thing that's out there.
And that's an area where there's a large Air Force base as well.
Oh, yes. Yeah, and you very often find sightings. I noticed this early on with the upright wolf-like creatures, and it gets stronger and stronger, and even stronger in Europe. Europe, World War II, naval and air and land bases very, very often have this sort of activity connected with them. But all over other places too, where you've got military installations, there are very, very often more reports of these anomalous creatures of all kinds.
Wow. When you wrote the book, The Beast of Bray Road, and it was released in 2003, the sightings and the reports kind of picked up. Do you have any idea why that happened?
Well, yeah, I believe it's because people really hadn't heard of it. And if they had heard of it, they didn't know that anybody anywhere cared or was keeping a collection, and it had been like 11 years. When that book was published, it had been 11 years since that initial report. And I was just working for the newspaper, writing about other things all that time. I really had no clue that I would someday be, writing book after book. But when that book came out, it just caused an immediate explosion of people writing me. And remember, again, this was the early 90s when it first started, and this continued all through that decade, finding by snail mail the newspaper address, resorting to actual telephones on the wall with curly cords to find me and reporting things. And so when that happened, I had this huge collection of more sightings within no time, and that's why Hunting the American Werewolf came about. I thought, well, I've got to share these. And because I've really always considered that kind of my prime role was, I call it keeper of the lore, is kind of my tongue-in-cheek favorite title for myself. And so I did that, and then the same thing happened again, and thus the Michigan Dogman and other unknown upright canines across the U.S. and so forth, and it's just kept going until now. And I think that there are a lot more people also aware, people who might have just brushed it off as being a bear or a deer when they knew it wasn't, now understand that there is something else, that it validates. People will write me and they just say, oh, thank you for validating what I saw. I thought I was going nuts, or I knew it wasn't a bear, but I didn't know what else to call it, that kind of thing. So it raises the awareness, it raises people's ability to really understand and describe what they're seeing. And also there are more people taking the reports, for a long time I felt like the Lone Ranger. Nobody else in the world seemed interested in taking reports of things that look like werewolves. And I don't think that they're actual medieval style werewolves. I didn't then, and I don't now, but it's just something about that word. Nobody wanted to touch it. And so now the past few years it's become, quite popular on the internet. And so I credit that too. When you've got more people aware, more people looking, more people taking reports, well, of course you're going to get a lot more, and it will seem like there may have been just as many of the creatures beforehand. There just weren't as many looking for them and recording them.
Have you had any accounts in your area of these uprights showing any type of aggression? Because, quite frankly, the reports we've received here in Pennsylvania, they don't necessarily show aggression, but they stand their ground.
Right. It seems very much like territorial defense to me.
Right.
Although there's, in a lot of them, really, you can't help but see some sort of a note of what looks like kind of sarcasm almost, and sometimes it's like they enjoy stopping and scaring the people, and then they once they know they've raised the hair on the hackles of their necks really well, then they'll bound off into the cornfield or the woods or wherever it is, and people will, I'll continually hear these same three words. They'll say, I felt that it was sneering or jeering or leering. Something. All of those words connote an idea of distaste or thinking they're better than the other person, that sort of thing. And that's just not something you normally hear from people who run into, say, a bear, or a coyote. Whoever said I felt that the bear was sneering at me, it's just a different sort of feeling. And people will also say that they feel these animals struck them as more intelligent than just your regular animal. And I mean, bears and wolves are both pretty high on the IQ scale for animals. So to say something is more intelligent than a natural bear or wolf is really saying something.
Yeah, we've had instances where people have come across these beings and have been armed, but absolutely refuse or even are very hesitant to even take a shot at it. Now,
Right.
I don't know if it's because of it's putting off some type of vibe or whatever the reason is, but we have not ever had any instance where somebody's taken a shot at this thing.
Oh, I've had several. One was a guy who was out fishing in a flatboat in one of the southern states and saw an upright dogman or wolf-like creature standing right on the shore. And when he looked at it, his dog was in the boat with him and started barking, and the creature started coming right on into the water toward the dog.
Mm.
And so he did shoot it. He had an automatic pistol, and he gave it a couple of good rounds. And he said it just ran off into the woods. And he stayed in the boat a little longer because he was kind of afraid to go look. But when he did, there was no sign. There were a few drops of blood and nothing really. He thought he'd find a dead creature, 100 feet in, but nothing showed up. I have had a farmer tell me that he's sure he shot one. He said it was standing upright, and it looked like a wolf, and he was afraid it was coming toward him, and he shot it. And then when it was just lying there dead, he said it just didn't look any different from a big old timber wolf. And they do come down that wildlife corridor that I mentioned before. So there's not a breeding population of wolves necessarily, but they pass through. They can be in the area. But he said he was afraid that he would get fined big time, and they can take if you do something like that, they can take away your car. I mean, it can get pretty bad punishment. So he said he just dug a big hole and put him in it and covered it up, and wouldn't take anybody to where it was. I'm like, please, can you dig it up?
Yeah.
I'd really like to see the bones. He says, nope, I'm not going to have somebody take my truck or my stuff. I just told you so you know there was one. And he had waited. I was speaking, and he had waited till everybody else was gone before he told me that. And he was not seeking attention. He was dead serious and kind of frightened, telling me at the time too. I could.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Well, Linda, how can people contact you and find your books, and where are you going to be appearing at?
Well, the first question, lindagodfrey.com. No W's or anything. Just go to lindagodfrey.com. It has my book list and bio page, some recent stories that haven't been posted anywhere else or not in books, lots of other information. So just lindagodfrey.com. I'm going to be up at, or I'm going to be in Milwaukee. Just look up MKE Paracon, Milwaukee Paracon, right in the middle of October. I believe it's at the Irish Cultural Center again. And Seth is going to be debuting his Wisconsin screening of that movie. So if you haven't seen that, it's a good time to do that too. And then first weekend in November, I'm going to be up at the North Star Casino up in Bowler, kind of over toward Green Bay, that area of Wisconsin, for a brand new Paracon that they're just starting this year. And that's going to be a lot of fun too. I'm working on a couple of other projects. I've got a new book and having a very laborious birth at my publishers. It's just taking a very long time for various reasons, but should be out sometime this year, I'm hoping. And that goes even into some of the really wilder stuff. So
wow,
it'll be interesting.
Well, I look forward to reading that. Linda, thanks for coming on with me. You and I can probably talk for hours and hours, and
days.
Yeah, we do keep in touch and try to put reports, give each other reports on certain things that pop up our way. So I had to have you come on again, and when your new book comes out, we'll definitely have you on.
Oh, thanks so much. Anytime.
You take care now.
You too. Thanks, Lon.
Mm-hmm. Now, before I go, let me leave this with the listeners. In the movies, the villain always died in the end. Even the monsters, for instance, Dracula, stick a wooden stake in his heart, and he turned to dust. But those things in our nightmares always seem to come back to haunt us, sometimes beyond our dreams. I thank everyone for listening to the show and for your support. Good night, and have a great weekend.